Hey, what's up, everybody? What we're going to do first is we'll go and just introduce ourselves. And then I have some questions here. What I want to do, the panels today have kind of been just the people up here talking. I want to try to get some audience involvement if we can. I realize we don't have mics, so it might be a little hard. But odds are you're going to have way better questions than I have right here. So if you have a question, just like yell or raise your hand, and I'll find you, and then we'll get those answered. Okay? So Michael, do you want to go ahead and start us off? Who are you?
I'm Michael Jackson. I write a lot of React code. You might know me from such films that, no. You might know me from some of the React projects, React Router and the history projects.
I'm Byron Holt, previously of Reddit, but currently working as a UI engineer at Netflix, and also occasionally on the side do some talking at front-end masters and some of those.
I'm Tyler McGinnis. I work at a startup called Sparrow, where we are building a React Native app to better help people affected by cancer to connect to each other.
Hey everyone, my name is Stepan. I work on M, the personal assistant for Messenger. Though that sounds like it doesn't involve a lot of JavaScript, it involves a lot of JavaScript. So I look forward to talking.
Hey guys, my name is Byron. I work at Facebook on a bunch of our product infrastructure, including React, Immutable.js, and GraphQL.
Perfect. So we're going to start things off here with a pretty good question. So Falcor and Relay are two very new and upcoming technologies. And we have Brian here who works at Netflix, so he's done a lot of Falcor. And both these guys have done a lot of Relay. So basically, let's go ahead and have Brian start off with kind of what Falcor is, why it's useful, and kind of his side of the story.
Yeah, so I'm an enthusiastic consumer of Falcor and occasional contributor to the docs, i.e. I didn't write it, and so that's that perspective. So the basic gist of it is you want to be able to treat your data, whether it's remote, whether it's locally, as if it was already there, or maybe that not necessarily already there, but you get to treat them the same way. And I feel like that's kind of a holy grail, right? Like you're seeking to not have to distinguish, like, well, I don't have this data, so I need to go grab it, right? So Falcor kind of seeks to alleviate that problem, that you can treat both data remote, whether it's coming from the cache, whether it's coming from any number of sources, the same way. And then Falcor, given some instructions, can go out and fetch it. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, that sounds a lot like Firebase. Have you ever used Firebase? I know Tyler's got a ton of experience.
I love Firebase.
Kind of like a backend as a service.
Yeah.
So I mean, the difference is like there's no backend included, right?
Yeah, right.
But I could see some similarities like to the client that you use for Firebase for sure, and I would even say maybe there's some inspiration there. And I think that's a really powerful thing that you don't necessarily have to distinguish, right, where it's coming from. And there's some interesting features like you can give data time to live, and at some point it's going to go stale, and then at some point in the future we're kind of hoping to like do something where you can open up a WebSocket to your backend and say like, hey, next time the user asks for this data, it's stale, even though it's in your cache, you have to go out to the server and fetch it. So some of the stories, the client is just an absolute joy to use, and the server can be a little bit of a nightmare to write. I think it's kind of the story. I think it's kind of some of the story for Relay as well. But it's pretty exciting, and once you start using it, it's really fun.
Who here has anyone used Falcor? Cool. What about Relay? A few of you. Cool. Lee, do you want to go ahead and talk about Relay?
Yeah, someone's winning. I didn't see who it was, though.
Yeah, I can give the 10-cent introduction. So Relay is kind of a bridge piece of software between two different technologies, React and GraphQL. We've heard lots about React. What GraphQL is a way to ask your server a very specific question about exactly the kind of information that you want, nothing more, nothing less, and then make the life easier for both the client developer to be able to specify that thing and make the life easier for the server implementer to make it very, very easy to fulfill that kind of a request as efficiently as possible. And what Relay does for us is co-locates a small description of what data you need with every React component that needs data in the first place, which makes it really easy to refactor stuff. So if you've ever been in your application and you need to delete some feature and you're kind of nervous about deleting fetching the data because you might not be sure if some other part of your application is still using it. Like that whole problem goes away. And then as new data is entered into the cache on the client, then we know exactly which components ask for that data, and we can re-render only those components that need to re-render. So Relay is kind of the glue piece, and then GraphQL and React are like client-server protocol technology, and then React, of course, is our view rendering technology.
So is Relay, is it production ready? Are people using it? Should I start building my startup on it?
So it certainly works in production. We have a bunch of apps that use Relay. Whether or not you should build your thing in production on it, I think totally depends on what your project looks like and if it maps well to the ideas of Relay. Relay is a framework where React is a library. So React is a library. It does one thing really well. It provides an explicit API for doing those things. And the hope is that you can use that in tandem with any kind of back-end data source, whether that's local, remote, whatever. And GraphQL kind of is similarly, it's like it only cares about that conversation between the client and the server. But Relay, in being a framework, makes a lot of assumptions that you're going to use all of those technologies together in a particular way. And then it has lots of opinions about how you should do that. So if you're looking for something that has strong opinions, and then it will give you some clear benefits, certainly consider Relay, and we are using it in production in a bunch of different places, so it certainly works at scale in large applications. At Facebook, we use it for our ads manager, which is one of the most complicated pieces of UI that we have on Facebook.
Brian, do you want to answer that same question for Falcor?
Yeah, ditto, pretty much. I was looking for discrepancies. I was like, well, Falcor is this versus Relay, and it shares a lot of similarities, and I think kind of the remarkable thing to say about both Relay and Falcor. First of all, Relay is totally awesome. I just kind of toyed around with it, and I was really impressed with it. They're convergent evolutions. As far as I know, no one collaborated between our two companies, and yet we arrived at pretty similar answers to it. And so I think that says a lot that two companies full of really smart people came to relatively similar conclusions. I'll be totally honest. I wrote kind of some of the examples for how to use Falcor with React, and I just looked at how they did it with GraphQL and kind of copied it. Because it's a really good idea, right? Like you have these like...
Awesome.
Yeah. You had like these statics that you put on your React components, and then it's just as you're like building up these queries by calling the child's statics queries, right? I just did the same thing and did called a union with using Lodash and ended up with a pretty similar thing, because where there's GraphQL, there's JSON Graph, right? And they look, somewhat similar.
So let's switch gears a little bit. If you've gotten started with a React project, specifically if you're like just starting with React, you've probably noticed that it can be kind of frustrating because there's a lot of different technologies going into it. And I saw a lot of tweets earlier this year, when this year first started, talking about how, hey, hopefully 2016 is kind of the year that we figure out tooling and we make it easier to spin up projects. So the question I have for the panel is this whole idea of like it's hard getting started with React, is that a tooling problem or is that an educational problem?
I saw a great tweet this afternoon from a guy at Facebook, actually. This was a tweet from Ahmad Masad. Amjad Masad. You know him? Work with him? Yeah. He said, he was quoting Abraham Lincoln. He says, Abraham Lincoln said, quote, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." And Amjad says, Lincoln really nailed the ratio of tooling versus product. And I love that tweet because there is a lot of tooling that's going on right now, right? I think last year at React Europe, I forget who it was, coined the term DX. I think it might have been Chris. We talk a lot about the UX, right? We talk a lot about the end user experience. What's the developer experience like? What is the DX? With some of the technologies that we're used to using, the DX hasn't really changed very much. I think I saw a screenshot of, what was it? HyperCard. Have any of you ever seen a screenshot of the HyperCard development environment, right? It doesn't look too different from like debugging a web app in the Chrome Web Inspector. You've got your debugger, you can set breakpoints, you can sort of like go through the code, and you can see the output in your window. So, HyperCard was nixed in the 90s, I want to say, mid-90s, early 90s?
Early 90s?
Yeah.
Late 80s?
Steve Jobs, when he came back to Apple, was like, no more HyperCard, it's all Java. And a lot of people are upset. But anyway, forget, that's a different conversation. The point is, though, tooling hasn't really come that far, I feel like, in the last 30 years. And now in the last year and a half, it's like exploded, right? Like Pete Hunt gets up at that conference, what was it, like 2 years ago, and talked about Webpack, and all of a sudden everybody's like just not satisfied with their build tool because they realize that there's like something that can actually, optimize the entire build that can make their life a lot easier. We've got React, we've got these kind of data fetching libraries, we've got the router, like lots and lots and lots of things, HTML5 and the push API, like there's so much stuff.
Tools are also really new to the JavaScript environment as a whole, right? Even just like our experience building stuff. When I started using JavaScript, I literally like opened a file that was called script.js, and I like wrote my entire program, and like that was the end of it. And when I wanted to test it, I reloaded the browser, and I had all the tools that I needed. And there's some huge pros to that. One of the huge pros is I can go to any website and I can right-click and I can hit view source, and I can see exactly what their script.js looks like. And that's actually like how I taught myself programming. But like as we try to build more complicated stuff, we've had to add tools. And it's kind of like this thing of like how different free is from $1. Like if someone's like the coffee is $1, and then tomorrow the coffee is $1.50, you're like, eh. But like if yesterday the coffee was free and tomorrow the coffee's $1, you're like, what happened? And that's kind of where we are with tooling, where like we were in this world where we didn't need a lot of tools because like the language was built up and the browser was built up kind of with the philosophy that it should be a flexible toolless environment, and all the tools we had were kind of embedded in the browser. But as we needed them, we had to like get over the hump. We're like, all right, crap, now we got to like compile our JavaScript. Like, I use JavaScript.
Now we need a Babel RC, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then when we do that, it turns out that there's like 8 competing solutions for doing that. And it's like, okay, well, also we make mistakes when we write JavaScript, so we should probably, look for mistakes. So it turns out there's like 5 different ways to lint your JavaScript, and they all have pros and cons. And then we start adding new features, like, well, what happens when you want to declare like tree hierarchies in JavaScript? It'd be really cool if we had a syntax for that. JSX comes about, and like everyone freaks out because it's not compatible with all the existing tools. And I think that's like maybe the beginning of this kind of angst that it's not only that JavaScript was already going through this like we're adding tools and it sucks phase, but like React is not making the process easier by any account. And then we like do it again, and we're like, hey, JavaScript should have types. It's really cool, guys. And we're like, oh crap, not again. Like all our tools broke. But the cool thing that I think has come out of this, and I think 2015 was the year of the tools for JavaScript, because we went from like, hey, there's this new project called 6to5, and like now, like Babel is downloaded more than 1 million times every day from NPM. In the course of a year. And like ESLint is taking off like a rocket. I don't know if you saw this thing that the author of ESLint posted, I think last night or earlier today, telling kind of the story of where ESLint came from. And it came from humble beginnings, and it's now everyone else is kind of on like a slow climb in terms of how many downloads they're getting. ESLint is like, they just hockey sticked. And the realization was it was designed from the get-go to be very flexible, and you can plug in new parsers, and you can plug in new rules. And so when React came about, we're like, all right, just plug in this stuff. And so part of the reason that they blame ESLint being popular is because React inserted all these hard problems in the tooling environment. And then like there's Browserify versus Webpack. And so part of it is that like there are all these different tools, and it's like everyone has their own concoction of how all of them click together. And it sucks because no one can agree. But as much as it sucks, it's awesome because like
totally awesome.
It's awesome because like I don't know if you've ever had to write an iOS application. Like if you ever don't like the tool that Apple gave you to do the iOS stuff, like tough luck. Like you can't do anything about it. If you're in JavaScript and you don't like the tools, build a new one, and it might become the next ESLint or the next Babel. And I think that's actually like a trade in our favor. That when things suck, like hey, we're engineers. What we do when things suck is we build tools to fix them. And when we stumble upon a tool that's really useful, then lots of people will start to use it. But I do think that we've started to end up in the spot where we have Babel, we have ESLint, we have a lot of these tools that are designed to be flexible and they're designed to fit together, and we're starting to see kind of like a common tooling basis that everyone's starting to agree upon, and that gets me pretty excited that we have kind of both of the good sides. We have the beginnings of a tooling platform that's really powerful, at the same time that we still have the flexibility for lots of people to kind of toy in the waters and come up with new cool ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my hope for the React world in 2016 is one where we start to settle, but the people who are kind of like the pioneers, I guess, can continue to push the limits. But also, like, the beginners can come and know, hey, just use Babel with Redux and these.
Yeah, what I would love to see. So, like, one of my favorite parts of React is Hotloader, and all my like projects I use Hotloader, and it's like, holy crap! Like, and every time I show it to another engineer who's not familiar with React, they're like, you can do that? Like, you didn't have to reload the browser, and like, you didn't even have to click back to where you were. Just the thing updated. It's like, yeah, I can change arbitrary logic, and it just works. And their minds are blown. But I had to set up all this crap in order to get that environment, and like every new project I do, like all of those things have updated to the latest versions, and some of them are.
Was that even possible 2 years ago? Was
No,
anybody doing hot reloading 2 years ago?
Yeah, live reload.
Yeah.
I mean,
Live reload.
you
That's
can
like
reload
auto
the
refreshing
browser.
the page, right?
Certainly not in JavaScript. There are
Yeah.
other environments.
Oh,
there are
totally,
other
in
environments
Erlang,
that like
whatever.
compiled to JavaScript that were playing with these ideas.
Yeah.
But the idea that like, hey, there's just like a common set of tools that if you use it, you get this. But what sucks is like you get someone who's relatively new to JavaScript or maybe even just new to programming as a whole, and you're like, hey, you're new to programming and you want to do UI. React might actually be like a really helpful way to help conceptualize UI and start to program. But step one, like, init environment, and like that sucks. So that's the thing I
barrier
think we
to
need to
entry
help
is
with.
really, really high, and I feel like that's something that we need to work on as a community to like lower some of those barriers. And I don't know, what do you think are easy ways to do that?
Yeah, the question Michael and I have talked about this a little bit. Is the answer like a CLI? I don't think so. Is the answer more education? I don't know. Michael, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it takes time to hit on the right answer, right? To hit on the right abstraction, I think it takes time. We've seen, like, I think right after the article that you're referring to is the one about JavaScript fatigue, which I thought was interesting because the first thing that popped into my mind was like fatigues that people wear when they're in battle, you know? And I was like, JavaScript fatigues. What are they, like yellow?
Where can I
or
get a
something?
pair of those?
It's a startup idea.
It was hilarious, actually. In response to that article, I think probably the next day or two, there were like 500 new React boilerplates up on GitHub. Everybody saying like, use my boilerplate. It does everything I would want it to do. Like, maybe it doesn't do what you want it to. I don't think a boilerplate is the answer. It's something like what HTML5 boilerplate was for a lot of people. I think the answer is going to be something that's more like a tool, like a library that you can include. A CLI, maybe a code generator, but it's not. I don't really want a code generator. I don't really want to generate a ton of, Rails generate my new controller thing. I always felt like that was kind of silly given the highly dynamic nature of Ruby. Not to bash on Rails. Rails is awesome, yeah. But I hope that whatever solution we converge on is something that's a little bit more, just something that you can import, you can include it, and now it's got a bunch of like useful utilities that you can use to do really common stuff. I can do server rendering really easily. I can do long-term asset caching really easily, data loading and routing on the client and on the server in the same way. Solving those kinds of problems. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be a tool like other stuff that we've seen solving similar problems.
I also think like we need to steer it away from tooling for React to tooling for JavaScript.
Yep, for the web. Yep.
Yeah, because first of all, that's the right thing to do for kind of maximum value, and that's exactly what ESLint and Babel and kind of all the stuff we're talking about are. And it's really only small bits and pieces that are React specific when we get to them. But what you want is this. These tools that work for everything in JavaScript, and then what you want React to be is like smaller and smaller and smaller, and ultimately like a very small piece and a very small API, such that there really isn't much React specific that you need to tool directly against. And some of these ideas like Hotloader, it would actually be great if we saw that kind of approach work with other kinds of environments and other kinds of tools, not just React as well. So I'd love to see all this stuff get more general as well, as easier to set up.
Have you seen, I'd be interested to know internally at Facebook, as like Redux came out and all of these like new tools were built since you open sourced React, has that changed internally what you're doing at Facebook, or do you just kind of still just do what you've always been doing?
Oh, we're absolutely influenced by cool new ideas that happen outside of Facebook. And in fact, the guy who built Redux works at Facebook now.
Yeah, I think you just hire him, right?
And the guy who built Babel.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just hire them if they have great ideas.
Wouldn't you want to hire people
yeah,
with
yeah.
smart ideas? I mean, I feel
not a
super
bad
blessed that I
strategy.
get to, that I get to work
it's
with those people.
complimentary.
But yeah, I mean, like, that's one of the main benefits of open sourcing stuff is, you know, it's insane to think that every good idea is going to come from your company, like, regardless of its size. I've worked at a handful of different companies that all kind of had this mentality that there's like, oh, the smartest people are around. It's like, no, like there's so many people in the world and only so many of them work at your company. You may have an outsized group of smart people compared to the general population, but so do most other companies, and they're gonna have people that are really, really smart. And so the best possible thing we can do to move ideas around is like get stuff out in the open and have conversations about it. And we probably wouldn't have come to the Redux conclusion without someone outside of Facebook coming to the Redux conclusion, because they're playing with stuff that looks different from how we're playing with it at Facebook. And we realize only in hindsight, oh, cool, that idea works for us too.
So I want to turn it over to the audience real quick. Is there any audience questions you want to get over here? I'm going to forget your second question. So could we answer your first question, then get to your second one? Okay, cool. So the very
Loaded question. That's a loaded first question. That
That's a
might
good
be all
question.
you get to say. Actually.
So the question was basically like, hey, there's obviously these patterns that everyone is doing. One of them is like HMR, hot module replacement. Why don't we just standardize upon that, and then we all just start building upon that? That was the question.
Best one online.
All right. Hey, the battery works on this one. We're losing batteries fast over here. So I think that I'm glad you brought up standard. That in particular is really exciting to me. And I think one of the aspects you have to ask yourself when you're tackling these problems of convention versus configuration is, will your convention satisfy the needs of a very large majority of people? And when it doesn't, what does the escape hatch look like? And for linting, I think it's pretty reasonable to say almost all the lint rules that JSHint or ESLint give you just kind of like add incremental strictness where you can either say like, I don't care, or, oh, it's nice to have the strictness. But once you're kind of past that line and you're like, I just want great JavaScript, you can just add all the rules. But some of the rules are configurable. It's like, do we add semicolons or do we not? And it kind of comes down to opinion. But it doesn't make it like my JavaScript's not going to run faster or slower. It's not going to be like, well, my application.
That's not true. Without semicolons, your code does run faster.
3 semicolons after every line will make your JavaScript program run faster. It's not in, like, the constraints of the program aren't affected by your lint rules. So it's totally safe for a lint rule engine to say, here is a reasonable default that is opinionated, but we think is opinionated in kind of the right spot that hits everything. And to be fair, like, lots of people have tried this before, and standard was really, I think, the first one that hit like a happy medium between what they add and what they don't. And at every point in the past, someone's like, oh, that's great for them, but like, I disagree with too many of their rules, and so I'm not going to use it. But when you get into Webpack, now you're talking about the actual like runtime behavior of your application, and now you're definitely talking about like, my application has these characteristics which need this very different thing, and you might have something that's okay for small apps but not big apps, or small apps that do this kind of thing but not that kind of thing, and you like very quickly need the escape hatch, and then you're right back where you started again, except you had this like whole bag of stuff that you had to figure out how to work around.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not easy, and I think maybe there is something that feels like the standard of JavaScript compilation and bundling, and like when someone finally hits that nail on the head and like 80% of JavaScripters are like, thank God, that's what I've wanted all along, then like that'll be the thing. But until that happens, I think we'll keep looking at, like, Michael, you already mentioned after that article came out, there's like half a dozen different React boilerplate XYZs that came out, and all of them were ignored, even though they're exactly what you're talking about. They're exactly this, like, we'll do all these things, you install this one thing, and then you get everything you need to tool React.
Yeah, sorry, Lee. You know, Webpack, does things that I was not able to do before. I mean, when you think about Webpack, what it is a tool that if you, by tweaking the parameters, you can control how many HTTP requests actually hit your server. Right? I mean, think about that, right? So I can tweak a little parameter in the file loader and say, hey, inline a file that's less than 10K, make a new request for a file that's more than 10K, right? That's me deciding in my config, okay, it's okay to make one more HTTP request for a file that's larger than 10K. That kind of whole program optimization is something that I haven't seen before, personally. So I think it's just it's like, consider past times when, it's probably not quite as great a change as the Industrial Revolution, but on a micro scale,
Pretty close.
For our industry, I feel like 2015 was like a mini Industrial Revolution for people who are web developers, right? And some people are like,
quote him on that. I want to see tweets.
Overheard.
yeah. And they're like some people who are still out there with like the mule and the plow, and they like look over here, and there's a guy with the cotton gin, and they're like, hey, that's unnecessary. That's totally unnecessary.
JS was my mule and plow.
And Eli Whitney's like, hey man, this is great. I get my work done in half the time. So there's gonna be some pain. It's gonna take some time, but eventually, like, we'll get there. I have no doubt we'll get there very soon, actually.
What do you guys think about the problem generally that I feel like as that Industrial Revolution happened, now the problems that every person needs to solve are at this extremely high level, right? Like maybe a new engineer doesn't know why they need to use Redux or why they need to use Relay. Yeah, or server rendering. And then all of a sudden, it's not even just a configuration problem, it's this other problem where there's these ideas that they don't even know why they need solutions to.
But they need to do them all.
Yeah.
Right? All the time. Because I saw this sample app that had Redux, and they were server rendering, and they had the router in there, and gosh, I wasn't doing any of that stuff last year, but now that I know that it's possible, give me all that stuff, right?
Yeah,
I don't think that's a wrong way to feel. It's awesome.
I don't know. I feel like we just had this like big Christmas where we had so many presents under the tree, and we opened them all, and we have all these toys. We don't know which one to play with, and so we're just playing with all of them. And we're like, all the toys are cool. Let's play with all of them. And we're like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, we can't have these two toys play together. What are we even doing anymore? I'm not having fun. I'm having an existential crisis. I think we're in the same spot where, like, we have all these tools at our disposal. That's only a good thing. And in fact, like, the more tools that come out, and even when tools are similar to other tools, that is only a good thing because it gives you different flavors of new ideas. You get to learn how all these things can connect to each other. You can build new kinds of stuff that you could never do before. But if you're using the tools because someone told you that if you don't, then your app will be slow, or if you don't, then you'll be left in the past, you're using it for the wrong reason. When you see these new tools, it's important to keep abreast and hear about them and understand them, but understand what their pros and cons are and what they're offering, and if that's actually relevant to what you're building in the first place. Like, you don't need Redux for every React application. In fact, I have a bunch of side projects that I don't use Redux
or the router,
for. And
or server rendering.
Or any of those. Better way to do this, and I have a better way to do this. You might like, oh, we should listen to your idea. What is this? Like, oh, there's this different way to do it. Maybe we should investigate Elm. Maybe we should investigate this other thing. You can have conversations around the merits for the specific tools.
Question number 2. Oh, his hand's up. This is going to be a good one. He's ready.
So the question that he's asking is, how is Falcor then just pulling an RxJS or Bacon or something like that and just working with the raw observables? It's like, and if you're prepared to work with that, prepared to basically build your own little framework out of that, go right ahead. Like, you're going to end up with something that, I don't know, like I always say, when you're pulling in a library, you're perpetually going to have a square hole round peg, or other way around. Anyway, kind of problem, right? Because someone else is building something for their own use case, right? For example, we built Falcor because at Netflix, we have Falcor problems, right? So we have a round peg and a round hole, right? So Falcor fits perfectly for what Netflix is doing. And so no matter what, you're not building Netflix. Well, I really hope not. Well, whatever, go ahead.
If you're feeling ambitious.
Yeah, seriously. So but you're always going to have that just like slight misfit, right? And it's just going to have a little bit of friction. I mean, it might be really close to what you're doing. So if you're feeling ambitious and you feel okay doing kind of what we're doing, then go right ahead. But what Falcor is going to end up buying you is it's going to end up buying you that does the smart caching for you. It has JSON graph, and JSON graph has the ability to relate two objects, right? Like if I have two movies that share the same actor, right, and I update the actor in one, it's going to update the actor in the other, right? And that's not free in JavaScript because we don't have graph-like data structures, not primitive to JavaScript anyway. That's something that you have to build yourself. And so, I mean, it's kind of the story of any framework or library that it does buy you some things that comes with other pains, right?
So we are pretty much out of time. Is there anyone with one question they really want and ask us? Oh,
More
sorry, there's
double
two.
headers.
Talk to us after. All right, back here.
I could speak to this a little bit, maybe. We have 30 seconds. Count. So one of the ways that we are personally trying to address the problem, and we're working with Facebook on this as well, is just providing clear places where you can get help with this stuff, right? And bringing it together and making sure that it all works well. So I personally run the Racked GitHub org, which is the org that works on Redux, and we work on React Router and React Router Redux and a bunch of other add-ons for the router. And we wanted to bring them all under one umbrella, basically to make sure that, okay, this stuff all works well together, and there are a lot of people that are building their stuff on this, so we need to provide like some good support and long-term maintenance. We've been talking with the React team about possibly like working closer together, even on like core React stuff. Maybe possibly Redux. It has yet to be seen like whether or not something's going to happen. But I think basically the answer that I'm trying to say is, we're trying to set up places where people can go. They know that it's being actively developed. They know that it's not just going to die, and that it's going to be maintained for the long term, and that there are people who care about this who are working on making all the pieces fit nicely together. So you're not going to build your business on something and then find out next year that it was somebody's weekend project, and now you have to use something else.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. Sorry, we're out of time. We're like 5 minutes over, so they're going to kick me out.
Come talk to us.
If you have questions, come up and ask
comes
us.
the gong.
Specifically, Michael loves talking about observables,
Yep.
so feel free to ask him about
I love
those.
them.
All right, thank you.